Alright, I'm loving my current run on Wasteland 3, but after sinking about 40 hours into the game, I'm already starting to realize that it might be too dense for some of the new players that want to check it out. And even being an experienced RPG Tactics player, there are a few things that I wish I knew back when I started, so for all you newbies and even some of you veterans out there who still have questions, specifically about attributes, here it is. Wasteland 3, a basic guide to attributes. Coordination, luck, awareness, strength, speed, intelligence, and charisma. Better known as Classic. Coordination is the bread and butter attribute. Most important thing that it affects are your action points, which you spend on moving and performing actions. I like to start everyone with at least 4 coordination because that gives you a +2 to action points. If status effects scare you, starting with a base stat of 12% status effect resistance is totally fine. Armor mods and perks can actually augment that stat better in the mid-game, so don't sweat it too much. Most status effects aren't the end of the world, especially on lower difficulties. So we're going to move on to luck. Luck, in my opinion, is really just for 2 types of characters. Pistol gunslingers and snipers. Feel free to correct me in the comments, but pistols and snipers need to be critting more often than not. Simply for the fact that they fire a single bullet at a time, and you really want that bullet to be doing as much damage as possible all the time. The lucky evades help with their survivability, and the extra penetration really helps with pistols early on because the early game pistols are really just kinda crap at breaking through the tougher enemy armor types. But then there's lucky actions. Lucky actions essentially means that the action that you just took is a free action. It refunds all the action points you just spent, and while these are incredibly advantageous and can sometimes turn the tide of a fight, I don't really think a new player should rely too heavily on luck bonuses, especially on their first playthrough. I'm not saying ignore luck, it's just not an attribute that you should rely too heavily on. Awareness. Hit chance benefits every character. Range characters obviously benefit the most with the range damage bonus, so this isn't really a stat that you want to dump points into for your brawlers and melee characters, as their strength, speed, equipment, and perks are going to help them more in the long run than awareness will. But then we come to perception. It's a useful but situational stat that mostly benefits sneaky characters. It allows characters to identify traps, alarms, hidden caches, and items in the world. It's even a dialogue check every now and again, but it's mostly for your character to notice an extra detail about an NPC that you're talking to. For these reasons, the stealthy scouts benefit the most from perception. It allows them to check ahead and identify hazards, and with the right skills, they can disarm traps and mines before the entire party decides to just blindly stumble over them for no reason. Which brings us to strength. Some really important things you need to know right off the bat. Strength is directly tied to constitution, which is your health stat in Wasteland 3. The base constitution or health for every character is 36 constitution, with a +5 for every point into strength that you have. 2 strength is 36 plus 10 constitution, 4 strength is 36 plus 20, and so on and so forth. Which brings us to con per level. Before you ask, because everyone, including myself, has asked, yes, con per level is retroactive. If con per level is 3, a level 10 character is going to have 30 extra health, no matter if they got that stat at the beginning of the game or at the end of the game. So don't worry about setting it too high at first, feeling like you're going to be missing out on health later in the game. It takes your current level into account at all times. As far as starting characters are concerned, you should never run a character under 2 strength just because of the +3 con per level bonus. And I can't emphasize enough that you really want your big guns, brawlers, and melee characters to run at least 4 strength starting out. Most heavy weapons and armors in the early game require 3 or 4 strength, and that +6 con bonus allows them to tank a little bit more damage when you're in combat. Obviously, melee characters are going to want more strength over the course of the game because of the damage bonus they get, but right out of the gate, their gear is not going to be all that great, and they operate by themselves, running into and behind enemy lines. You really want to keep them alive and pulling aggro more than just being a heavy damager early on. So speed and evasion is actually going to be their friend more than strength in the early game. Which brings us to speed. I'm going to talk about initiative later on in the video because its actual effects on combat are so minimal that you might as well ignore it just for now. The two most important things in speed are going to be your combat speed and evasion stats. The simplest way to describe combat speed is such. Every space in combat is essentially 1 square meter. 1.0 in combat speed is 1 square per 1 action point. A combat speed of 1.5 means you can move 3 spaces for 2 action points. 2.0 means moving 4 spaces for 2 action points. So, to recap, 1.0 combat speed equals 1 meter, or 1 space in combat. The more complicated stat here is evasion. Here's my best understanding of it. 100% chance to hit means that a shot will hit its target. So theoretically, if your character has an evasion of 25% and the enemy has a 100% chance to hit, that hit chance is reduced to 75%. At least, that's how I understand it. Is it a percent of a percent? Or is it a percent of a static value? I don't know. What I do know is it's better to avoid damage than take damage, and a high evasion mixed with high luck has kept my gunslinger alive in plenty of encounters. So in my opinion, it's worth having a moderate amount of speed on anyone. Personally, I give it to my hand-to-hand brawlers, melee weapon experts, and medics. But really, combat speed and evasion benefits any class. It's always good to have speed for positioning your characters at the beginning of a fight. So if you're ever unsure about what attribute to increase on a level up, speed is always a good go-to. Intelligence. Critical chance and critical damage on one attribute, awesome. Critical heal chance and bonus healing. Slightly less awesome, but pretty cool for medics, I guess. But now, we get to the most confusing benefit in the whole game. At least for me. You might be less dumb than I was, but I will explain for my fellow dum-dums out there. Gain 1 skill point for every 2 intelligence. So Mike, does that mean I retroactively get extra skill points, like strength does for health points? Nope, not at all. Okay, does that mean on level up I get an additional skill point for every 2 intelligence? Closer, but still very no. After testing, googling, and more testing, this is how I understand it. The first 2 points into intelligence, you get 1 free skill point. Every 2 additional points gains you 1 more skill point. Maxed out intelligence means you have gained a grand total of 5 additional skill points. And that's all. It's not nothing, but it's not the main reason you want intelligence. The crit stats are going to be good for all characters, especially snipers and gunslingers. The extra skill points, though, are simply a luxury in my opinion. Of course, this isn't a min-max optimal character guide, so I'm sure someone's going to disagree with me on that. And finally, charisma. This will probably be the most in-depth I'll get on here, because charisma is a bit of an everything in the kitchen sink attribute, so it kinda deserves it. Charisma is as important as you want it to be, basically. First off, we'll discuss strike and strike abilities. Strike is a bit like a combo meter in a fighting game. Successful actions, such as shots that hit their targets, will fill your strike meter by a set percentage. The strike rate stat is the percentage of strike you get for each successful action. For example, a strike rate of 20% means it'll take about 5 successful actions to fill your strike meter. When it's full, depending on the weapon that you have equipped, decides what kind of strike action you can take. Pistols have precision strikes that can target specific body parts and inflict extra damage and status effects on enemies, while shotguns and SMGs have a torrent strike that can do a massive amount of damage in a cone in front of the character. These are very useful abilities, and charisma is the most reliable way to increase your strike rate. And leadership range. Leadership range is directly tied to having the leadership skill. While I may do a bigger breakdown of skills and perks later, simply put, a character with the leadership skill gives a passive buff to hit chance to surrounding allies. The points you invest in leadership decide how good that buff is, and points in charisma determine the range around the character that buff is being applied to. So in action, someone with a leadership skill of 5 gives a buff of 5% hit chance to allies. With a charisma attribute of 5, that buff is given to allies in a 10 by 10 meter square around the leader. Because remember, every square on the battlefield is 1 meter. So if an ally is within 10 square meters of the leader, they are getting that hit chance buff. There's a few other little things about the leadership skill that I can get into, but I think I would save that for a skill and perk video later. The experience bonus is pretty self-explanatory. For every point into Charisma, you get a plus 2% in experience. You would think this means that it maxes out at 20%, but the last point of any attribute actually gives you a significant bonus to all the stats in it. The last point in Charisma in particular means that the experience bonus leaps up to 30%. I mentioned this at the end of the video because first-time players should never fully max out any attribute at the beginning of the game. But 30% extra experience is something worth mentioning, since you're essentially getting a third more experience the entire game. Experiment with it if you want. I might do a run in the future that takes advantage of it, but as for my recommendation for Charisma, I usually keep most of my characters around 2 or 3, and I've kept my leadership character at around 5. The benefits are good, but they're nothing earth-shattering. The hit chance buff and all the other buffs that come with leadership are alright. Mostly I get Charisma for the experience bonus though. And now, my final and very special category of stats that might be important but really aren't. The mission reward bonus in Charisma. The consensus I have found is that there is no consensus just yet. Does it apply to the money you receive at the end of a mission? Maybe. Does it apply to the experience you receive at the end of a mission? Again, a solid maybe. Let's assume it's both, and you have a 5% mission reward bonus. The mission reward is 500 experience and $500 cash. That means you would get plus 25 experience and plus $25.
Whoop-de-doo!
Another fun one is throwing range and the strength attribute. This stat decides how far you can throw deployables and grenades. I'm gonna tell you right now, the spaces that you fight in aren't that large, and enemies tend to move up on you very quickly. It's a rare situation where being out of range of throwing something is going to cost you a fight. So I'm going to tell you right now, don't worry so much about your throwing range. And finally, we come to the much maligned and confusing initiative system. And you would say, Mike, what initiative system? Then we'd all laugh and then start to cry a little bit and avoid eye contact. My understanding of initiative works as such. It is how efficient characters are at readying themselves for combat. If an enemy ambushes you, your characters with high initiative can seize initiative and take a turn before the enemy. Will my characters always do this? Not necessarily. Couldn't I just attack first and just have my characters go first every time? In the words of Ricky Bobby,
If you ain't first, you're last. You know?
And that seems to be the guiding principle of initiative in Wasteland 3. Always try to be the one who instigates combat first. Whether through dialogue, sneak attacks, or in some cases skill checks can even allow you to go first. But going first and being able to position behind cover can be the difference between a quick, easy fight or a curb stomp that wipes your whole team. Anyway, that's my basic guide on attributes. I'm thinking about doing videos on skills, perks, and character builds. If you'd like to see those, throw a like or comment below. Or, if you fundamentally disagree with me in every way and want to point out how wrong I am, I'm more than willing to do a more advanced guide later with everything that I've learned, and after I have a few more playthroughs under my belt. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.